of what Ntante Mlangeni stood for. His sense of social justice led him to take up arms in defense for humanity. He was trained as a soldier. He was the first recruit of Mkondo Wesizwe, the military wing of the ANC, and I know Sister Thandeka Qubule argues that it is no longer the Umkondo Wesizwe, but Umkondo Wesingwa, meaning that the spear of the blade. Together with his comrades, they were to undergo a military training in China. And I just want to move quickly. The training started in 1961, and many have really cited this. But it was during that training where the leader of the Communist Party of China, Mao Zedong, came to address the trainees on the occasion of the Chinese Army Day on the 1st of August 1962. What struck Ntante Mlangeni was the manner in which Mao conducted himself. He appeared to be, he appeared to be an iron fist disciplinarian. In his own words, Ntante Mlangeni was to later describe Mao as a person who was not ostentatious. He lived a modest life. This perhaps played a pivotal role in shaping the outlook of Ntante Mlangeni, who, after being elected to serve in the parliament of the first democratic government, remained in Soweto, unlike many of his counterparts who couldn't wait to lead affluent lifestyles. The culture of living masses in the townships and rural villages, while leadership enjoys the perks that comes with political office, were not the things that Andrew Mlangeni learned during his military training in China. Ntante Mlangeni was also fascinated in his military training by the manner in which the Chinese people embraced their culture and heritage sites. Perhaps having been a student of the Communist Party of South Africa, Mlangeni could have been inspired by the likes of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist, who founded the concept of cultural hegemony, meaning that the ruling class dominates the culture of society through the imposition of its views. This is similar to how colonizers imposes, their coloniality, followed by, of course, many genocides, where even especially in our continent, where they would impose their Western traditions to a point where natives found no value in their own culture. Andrew Mlangeni understood from the Chinese training that your culture is very, very important, in that it is through culture that sometimes revolutions conquered. Another important lesson that Mlangeni took from China was the spirit of patriotism. To be patriotic means loving your own country, the ability to identify with it, be concerned about its well-being together with its citizens. For the love of this country, Ntante Mlangeni, together with his fellow countrymen and women, waged a struggle against the most brutal apartheid system. They replaced it with a government based on democratic values and systems. Democratic values and principles. This government was never going to be led by angels, Minister Lamola. It is for this reason that even after his retirement from active politics, he felt the need to continue to hold the democratic government accountable, because it was not led by angels. He was still appointed to serve in the Integrity Commission of the governing ANC, where he confronted corrupt leaders head on. He spared no details. He summoned them. We know them. They failed, some of them, to appear before the Integrity Commission. As Alfred Marshall states, that government is the most precious of human possessions, and no care can be too great to be spent on enabling it to do its work in the best way. It was the very same effort and hope that Dr. Mlangeni hoped that he should continue to perfect our fragile democracy. I thank you.
We are certainly continuing to learn. We are certainly continuing to learn, and I am really, really impressed with the quality of the reflections of our panel today. I'm sure all of you are listening with bated breath. Comrade Mlangeni, this is wonderful. It's fantastic. Okay. We're now going to our fourth contribution, which is the Ntate Mlangeni's involvement in the armed struggle. And Dr. Lebogang Motso, who's also a UNISA academic. And Professor, I can see that your academics are very well trained. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests of the June and Andrew Mlangeni Foundation, members of the Mlangeni family, honorable members of Parliament, Minister Ronald Lamola and Deputy Minister Mlangeni Mkhize, Madam Vice Chancellor, Professor Puleng Nkabula, and my fellow panelists. I've already been introduced, but let me go ahead. I always do this. My name is Lebogang Motso. I'm an academic here at UNISA in the Department of Political Sciences. My fellow panelists have already touched on particular themes already, and I'll be particularly touching on Tate Mlangeni's involvement in the armed struggle and its significance to our time. Tate Andrew Mlangeni was a political activist, a member of the African National Congress, as well as a member of the Umkhonto weSizwe. He was among the Rivonia trialists. Of course, he was more than what I just mentioned. He was also a father, a husband, a grandfather, a friend, a mentor, and an alumni of this institution. For Tate Mlangeni, as a prominent member and leader within the ANC in the early 1960s, the armed struggle seemed to be an unavoidable factor. It was something that was building momentum within the anti-apartheid organizations in the country. Pronouncements such as that peace methods were no longer effective in the fight against apartheid government were being made. Non-violent strategies seemed to no longer be working for others. Of course, there were different views. But it was the Sharpeville massacre in 1960 which signaled the beginning of a far more brutal and intensive phase of the state of repression. The new policy of grand apartheid as a massive social engineering project created ethnically defined Bantu stands. Between 1960 and 1965, approximately 3.5 million Africans were forcibly removed to the state-created homelands known as Bantu stands. The intensification of these laws also resulted in the banning of the Pan-Africanist Congress and the African National Congress, which propelled the decision by the ANC in 1961 to move away from a passive resistance to the armed struggle. As a result of banning these organizations, the ANC and the PAC were forced to go underground and had to adopt new tactics that had to be adopted. Most significantly, the movements launched the campaign of the armed struggle. The ANC had always advocated a non-violent method, and debates over the use of violence were often acrimonious. Tate Mlangeni was a die-hard supporter of the armed struggle against apartheid, from the word go. But when the ANC National Executive Committee allowed Nelson Mandela to form the Umkhonto weSizwe in June 1961, he didn't think he had any chance of being recruited. As already mentioned by my fellow panelists here, he was one of the first 6 of the Umkhonto weSizwe to be recruited to undergo military training in China. After he returned to South Africa in the late 1962, he became one of the high commands in the MK. He disguised himself as a priest known as Reverend Mokete Mokoena and traveled around South Africa recruiting young people to go abroad for insurgency training. This was a clear indication to his commitment to the armed struggle and pursuing freedom. He was a modest, humble, he was called the quiet revolutionary. He was a giant amongst giants, a leader of the struggle who embodied the very core of what the political struggle represented and stood for. Ntate Mlangeni's selfless service to the cause is a mirror through which our struggle can be summed up. He was an individual concerned with securing the freedom of his people from the harsh and brutal oppression of apartheid. His sense of justice and his desire for equality were imparted in him by the realities he was seeing Black communities encountering oppression. Through his role in the ANC, he made significant contributions not only to our struggle for freedom, but also to building our democracy, which was equally significant. Ntate Mlangeni was awarded the Istwalande Siaparangwe, the highest honor of the ANC, for those who have made an outstanding contribution to the liberation struggle in 1992. He also received the Presidential Order for Meritorious Service Class 1, which was gold, which was awarded by former President Nelson Mandela in 1999. Pursuing an armed struggle arose as a result of feeling like all options had been exhausted, I believe at that point in time. Now in this day and age, at this very moment, we're faced with a different struggle. Although similar, that it requires us to be armed. When I say we and us, I refer to the majority of us here on the panel, especially the youth. The month of June commemorates Youth Month. It's a month in which the youth of 1976 across the country mobilized and armed themselves with placards and spirits of resilience to face men that were actually armed with weapons. This youth were fighting for a particular cause. They were protesting against the government's insistence that the Afrikaans language as a white minority language be used as a medium of instruction in high schools. We have a different struggle. The struggle of economic emancipation, which is embedded and linked in many other struggles. This afternoon, I want to highlight that we too require arms. By we, I mean, again, us, the youth. We too require arms, but of a different nature, I believe. This quote has already been mentioned, I think, by Professor Bastro and even Minister Lamula. Open quote. This is particularly referring to how Ntate Mlangeni valued education. He once said, one of the biggest prisons we are afraid of being locked up in was the jail of ignorance. We had to demand to have access to education, a fight that was fought over a period of 3 years until it was granted in 1967. Schooling, or rather education, is one of the subjects I'm very passionate about because of the denial I experienced in my own life, close quotation. This showed the importance of how Ntate Mlangeni valued education. The first weaponry our youth requires in our struggle, I believe, is education. Education is one of the arms our youth requires. A decolonized education is what I refer to. An education that is decolonial in a true sense. By that I mean an education system and curriculum that is centered on analyzing, explaining, interpreting truthful accounts of history that have shaped our current times. An education system and curriculum that is centered on knowledge that promotes proud, dignified, innovative mechanisms that African communities have always embodied. The second weaponry our youth requires is our struggle and support. We need to be armed with support emanating from our institutions of learning, such as the one that's hosting us this afternoon. The University of South Africa heralds itself as an institution that's centered on Africanization. Thus, prestigious institutions such as UNISA need to arm their students with knowledges, skills that reflect and transcend technological advancements. Furthermore, to arm students with knowledge that encourages open-mindedness, humanity, ubuntu. Functioning services that ensure students receive high-quality education, and most importantly, financial assistance in order for us to complete qualifications in record time. The third weapon we require, I particularly refer to our minister sitting here in front. We require policies, strategies, initiatives, programs that are youth-centered. We require these in order to enter spaces, platforms, institutions which Black communities were barred from entering because of oppression. We need these policies, strategies, programs for us to uplift the Black community. But precisely for us, the youth, the youth has been actively trying to fight an ongoing pandemic in black communities, which is poverty. We come from families where we're first-generation graduates. I speak for myself, hoping to be one of the ones to relieve our families from financial struggles. We struggle from being employed. We struggle from having to finish paying off student loans. We're breadwinners in our families. We suffer from the so-called black tax phenomena. To conclude, in many ways, we're still existing within a struggle. I say existing because to have a full sense of life and humanness is far from how black communities experience life. Therefore, we exist in a struggle of life, but we can somehow return ourselves to the values, ethics, morality of those embodied by leaders such as Ntate Mlangeni. We can achieve much more. Perhaps we can recreate our communities to reflect revolutionary thinking that is embodied in all our facets of lives. In response to you, Minister Lamula, perhaps through these weaponry that I highlighted earlier, we can somehow have the revolutionary safe in our hands, I believe.
I think the message is...
All right, let's come out of that memorial lecture coming from UNISA there, the inaugural memorial lecture in honor of Dr. Andrew Mlangeni. Let's give